now we can hear you. So Gay's from New Zealand. Do you want to give us a one-liner who you are?
Gay Dungey from the University of Otago in New Zealand. I teach radiation therapy.
Okay, thanks for joining us. And Peter, of course. And Peter is at the University of Sydney. And then we've got Sarah. Hi, Sarah. She's one of our panelists tonight. You want to give us a quick introduction who you are?
I'm a radiation therapist, but I've been in a research role for around 14 years. So I did my PhD with Michal as my supervisor, and I'm now doing a postdoc studying lung and breast cancer and PET imaging.
Yep, great. So I think we'll make a start because we don't have a lot of time. So the reason we decided to run this webinar is that there are many, many people out there who are not formal researchers, but they all come up with a question during clinical practice. And whether that may be a way of improving patient outcomes or a technical issue that they may want to check, there's always a question that comes across our desk at some stage. And the key is to determine which of these questions are actually worthy of following up and how we go about following it up so that we may in the future develop a research project from it. And I don't mean we are running a big randomized controlled trial. A lot of the times these initial questions turn into small projects like an internal audit or a small observational study. So we can all start by doing small projects and turning that question into a valuable project that can be internal, and it doesn't have to be a huge, big trial. So can we ask Sarah to tell us her experience, how you went about initially in this process, and tell us a little bit about your experience.
Sure. So I've always had an interest in research, I guess, and the way that I was fortunate to be introduced to research, and the way I'd recommend, is to find a great mentor who has done this before and who you can follow in their process. So even if it's just watching the process that they undertake to do a project, whether it's small or large, and if you can get involved in small ways, then that will help you to gain the experience and the understanding of the research, because it is quite different to clinical. And if you have a great mentor and somebody that has done it before, then it's a lot more efficient for you because you're not trying to reinvent the wheel. And it's also going to probably result in a much better product and a better use of your time and resources. So having a great mentor, and then there's so many wonderful online resources. So as Michal mentioned, you know, it might be a small comparison of a technique, method in your own department or something like that. And again, we're so fortunate now to have just this probably overload of resources that we can access to help you in every step of the way. So quite a few of these are on the Radiation Research Network that you would have seen. There's also the larger ones like the PRISMA guidelines that will, even though many of these resources are targeted at larger studies, they're equally as beneficial for some of the smaller ones to go through the same steps. So it really shows you the steps that are involved. Also Consort, so you can Google PRISMA and Consort and they show you the steps to go through. And I also saw, I'm not sure if this is on the website, but the Equator Network, it also has some wonderful resources there that you can have a look at, because depending on the size of your department or who you're working with, you may not have a great deal of research expertise and mentors in your department. If you do, that's wonderful, and just use them as much as possible. But if you don't, these online resources are great. But I think at the beginning of every single project, I'd recommend reading the literature and just going through what has been published, whether it's small or large. You may find that the question that you're trying to ask has already been asked and published, in which case that's wonderful. You can just get the answers straight away. But most of the time, it may have been done, but there might have been slight variations, maybe different equipment or patients that you're looking at, but you can then use their methods to help you and to fast track your own project. Or you may find that it's a completely new project, so you're really starting from scratch. But it's always so important to do a thorough literature review, reading what has been published in that field, and critiquing it according to those PRISMA and consort guidelines to help you. Because when you're starting out, it's difficult to always know what is a high quality article. So again, that's where your mentor will come into.
Yes. Does anyone want to comment on it? It's a shame we haven't got Laura online yet, because it would be nice to get her view from a radiographer's perspective. Caroline, can you make a suggestion, because you've done a qualitative study? Are you there, Caroline? Cass? Oh, we can't.
Sorry, Carl, I am there, but I'm just in the middle of trying to do dinner and things for the girls, so I'm kind of in and out, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay, no problem. No problem. So I'll put it out. Peter, did you want to make any comments before we go into this a bit further? We can't hear you, Peter. Unmute yourself, please.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. Yeah, look, I think Sarah made a really good comment. Is a couple of things that I'd echo. Is it's great to have mentors in your department, people who can advise you and help you along the way. And the other thing is there's no getting around it, but you really need to hit the books and understand the literature as well, and take the time to read up on the topic. Because lots of people have thought about very similar problems, and it's from that reading that you have a much better understanding of what the current knowledge is in the field. And you'll see their sort of designs that they use as well. So it starts to give you ideas how you might answer the questions that you might have.
And I think it's important, Sarah hinted on that as well, that you look at your own patient demographic and see that maybe there's a gap for your own patient cohort. A study may have been done in another country or in a large metropolitan hospital, and you may be dealing with a completely different patient group, and there may be a need to repeat a study for your patients or for your protocol or equipment. So just because something has been published does not mean that you shouldn't validate those results in a different setting. So,
I think well, I've got perhaps two seconds of the children eating the tea. From a qualitative perspective, I think it's important that if people are interested in a qualitative study, there's kind of the research design, and there's also the theoretical lens and the methodological approach that people need to consider, as well as the research design. So like Peter said, it takes a lot of reading and kind of getting your head around before you starting and talking to as many people as.
Yeah, okay, she muted herself again. And I think if you are working in an environment where there are no mentors or very little support, I think you can contact people in other institutions you may know, or even in universities, or anybody to give you a leg up on how to make the move, because it's really exciting once you've identified a question that is worthwhile developing into a research study. So it's just a process, and you shouldn't be put off by the reading. Often within a couple of hours, you have a fairly good idea of what's been published. It doesn't take days and days and weeks of reading. You start a search and you get a fairly good idea of what's been done in the field. Does anyone want to make any comments? Do we have any questions? You can type out your questions to us and we can deal with them, just like Q&A do. And that worked quite well in the last webinar. Peter, have you seen any questions come in?
No, I've been keeping an eye on the questions and nothing's come in.
And
a couple
still
of
away?
Yeah, I've sent Laura an email and just waiting to see if she responds.
Okay.
I'm just worried that maybe she got confused about whether it was 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock. So I might.
Where is she located?
She's in Sydney.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so there shouldn't be a time difference there.
No, there shouldn't be.
Okay, so let's work on this, if there's no questions, a bit further. Say you have developed your idea and you have looked in the literature and there seems to be a gap. What should be the next step in your progress towards creating a research project? Sarah, what do you suggest one should do?
Sure. So I think it's important at this stage, so hopefully you do have a mentor or mentors of some description to work with, because I think, again, it's really important to point out at this point, even if it's a combination of mentors with strong research skills, you need to, the best studies happen when you're working in a team environment. You know, you'll never see papers published with just a single author. It's always a team of people, and that's because different people, different members of the team are bringing different skills to your work, and they won't necessarily all be radiographers or radiation therapists. They might be medical colleagues, medical physicists, and so on. Even, you know, the librarians in the hospitals are terrific resources to assist with lit reviews. But once you start working out your project, you really want to try to establish what the aims are and what you need to achieve to get those aims. And again, as Michal was saying, for these projects, you want to achieve them in a pretty small time frame. And if you're working full-time clinically and you don't have a lot of time outside of that, you need to plan out your time really well. So I think another consideration at that point is to access any protected time that you can get, because that'll also make a much better use of your time if you can get a couple of hours a week to meet with those people and to really get into it. Well, you also need to consider ethical requirements. So I know in our own department, for many of the smaller projects that we do within our department, we won't necessarily need to go to the full committees at the hospital, which are the clinical research committees and ethics committees, but we do have a review process within our own division to review protocols, and that's to look at the scientific integrity of them and also to look out for patients. So even if many of these projects are retrospective and you're just looking at scans that have been acquired already on patients that have finished their imaging or their treatment, you still need to keep in mind that what you do with those results, and if you publish them or present them, could affect patients in the future. So ethically, you've got to consider that from a longer term perspective.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And a lot of, yeah, sorry?
I'm all over the place here, but there is
we actually have to backtrack a bit because we've had a question. Peter, would you like to address the question and read it out for everyone?
Yeah, sure. There's a question here from Emma, and the question is, how are people doing their literature reviews? I don't have a uni library to access yet. Is Google Scholar just a start point? P.S. Thanks for letting me join.
Does anyone have any thoughts about Google Scholar?
I love Google Scholar.
You love it?
I love Google Scholar too.
Why is that? Why do you love it?
Because it's a great go-to just to start with. Because of the university libraries now, I mean, I'm speaking for Otago and I'm sure Sydney's the same. You have, or in Melbourne, so many different databases that you can use that I think Google Scholar, and you can restrict your search to the current year or a number of years, and it's a really good start point. And then you can go into the databases when you know a bit more about what you specifically want to look at.
So I use PubMed a lot because that's also publicly available. The only problem here is that you get the abstracts, but you often don't get the actual articles. And you need to then source them from another library somewhere. But at least you get the abstracts, and you can then already start to create a picture of where your literature is at. But yes, I sometimes use Google Scholar, and I know a lot of the students do. Do you use it, Peter?
Yeah, I use a couple. I use, like yourself, I use PubMed. I really like that. And And I guess I'm lucky with the university that often when websites have articles on their system, it seems to match up if you're online, that you can get straight into those articles. But Google Scholar is great too. It's just a quick place to do a search. And with Google Scholar, I log into it and I subscribe. I tell it certain articles that I'm interested in, and I get an email just a couple a week just on topics that is of my interest. So it just highlights me to new research that's done in the area. So be mindful with Google Scholar. You can actually log in, you can create a profile, you can follow people, and also have alerts sent to you if there's things that you're interested in. Some of the university, I know with our library at Sydney University, even though you may not be a student there or a staff member, the library website has a really good search tool to look at a whole range of different articles. At least you can see the abstracts, and it's a good starting point. So I rely on that quite a lot because I find it's a really good tool, and you can sort of limit it to articles or books or whatever you like. So maybe some of the libraries associated with institutions that you're affiliated with have similar types of tools on their website that are open to the public.
Yes, I just say, hi, it's Rhonda Joy from New Zealand, University of Auckland, and also a PhD candidate with the University of Sydney. I think an often overlooked resource, and it's a simple one, is actually the reference list for the article you're reading at the time. And that can often show or demonstrate words that you hadn't thought of looking for that particular topic in terms of how it might be described in the literature. And it can be a little gold mine in there to actually extend or strengthen your search.
Yes, Sarah, just speak.
Sure, I totally agree. I think working with that with Google Scholar, you can quickly see, you can see on Google Scholar, so you see the authors and the title of the paper and the journal, but how many citations. So you know that if a paper has a lot of citations, that it probably reflects its quality. And then just as we've discussed, then I go to that paper and I look at their own references to find other relevant papers in that field. And another free resource that you might find if you don't have access is the ResearchGate network. So that's another fantastic online free resource within the research community. You can create a profile on there and list your interests. Again, look up those authors of the papers. And then if you don't have access, ResearchGate enables you to contact the author and request the manuscript too, which happens a lot, which is great. And then you can then share your knowledge and follow other authors that you're interested in too. So,
I've done it a lot. I've just emailed the author, the corresponding author, directly and says, would you mind sending me a copy of your paper? And most people are very happy to do that. So don't feel shy to have a go. And the other thing you can do if you're having trouble is to actually contact someone at a university and ask them to help you get on paper. And most departments like ours, and I'm sure yours, Peter, would be more than happy to help out clinicians who are looking for help. So feel free to contact us. I'm sure we're all quite happy to give you a hand. And we have fantastic libraries at our resource. So we're very lucky. But most large hospitals do too. So if you're nearby a large hospital, they have great libraries.
And they often have a service. I imagine it's the same at the hospital libraries, but you can get interlibrary loans through your library. So if Sydney University doesn't subscribe to a particular journal, I just need to go and talk to the librarian and they'll organise to get a PDF copy of that sent to me. So I imagine it's quite similar with all libraries. So don't feel like if your library doesn't subscribe to it, that's the end of the story, or doesn't subscribe to that particular journal. Talk to the librarian, and they're a fantastic resource to researchers and often underutilised because they just understand databases and how to get literature. And my experience is they're very positive and willing to help.
And if you want to learn how to do a search or even evaluate the quality of a paper, they're also there to do these things. So you don't have to be affiliated with a particular library. You can just ask them. And I haven't come across a librarian who wouldn't want to help. So they are a fantastic resource too when you're in that very early stage of developing a project.
And also a lot of most journal articles will have a contact person that you can, with their email address as part of the publication, and I've often just emailed them and asked questions about how they went about it, and they've sent me a load of resources. They've sent me the questionnaire, given me permission to do different things. So never be afraid to do that, and that's a compliment if someone contacts you about your research. So that's another simple way of doing it.
Yeah, so that was a really good question. Thanks, Emma. So keep the questions coming, please, so we can help you.
People may not know where to post it. It's on the chat
at
the bottom. So if you go to the bottom of the screen, you can see a chat icon. That's where it comes up with questions if people aren't sure. Yeah.
Okay, so Peter, what do you suggest one does when they've done their literature review?
I find that the one of the biggest challenges when you're starting is to try and focus your question down to something that's achievable with the time or the resources that you have. So it may be as simple as just getting a pen out and starting to try and articulate what it is that you want to investigate. Sometimes it may be a question that needs to be answered and you might have a feeling of what the answer is, or sometimes it might be something you just don't know the answer for, and it's kind of discovery in nature. So I think the next step is to try and articulate what it is that you want answered, and discuss that with other people in your department, and try and get some feedback as to whether you're communicating that well, and like I said, often it starts very large, so it's trying to get it down to a smaller size, something that's going to be achievable.
Yeah, it's much easier to start with a small project, which may be an audit of some sorts, where you're going back through your PACS records to, I don't know, look at radiation doses or whatever it is that you're interested in. And then I would say write down an aim. What are you trying to achieve? And try and make that aim as clear and specific as you can. So pare it right down to your department and your patient demographic and exactly what it is that you want to achieve. So don't start with this huge, goal of creating a cure for cancer. Just create a very small little project that is feasible within your department. So if you're interested in breast cancer, in that question, you should have access to breast cancer patients if you need them, or records. So don't start with something that's going to be hard to collect. Find data that is easily available for you, so you can go and, don't have to start collaborating with other sites in order to solve that. Look in your own department and see what questions you can answer there. Is that how you started, Sarah?
Yeah, for sure. And I think the best process for me, I guess I make the analogy to which many people sort of relate to is, building a house or renovating a house, that you don't just start and get the hammer out and start putting it together. The more effort you put in working out what you're going to do before you actually start, it just pays off in dividends, because you've thought about each of the processes and you've documented it. So I think writing it down in the form of a protocol, and I don't mean for that to be really cumbersome and long, but you need to write it down in your order. So a very brief summary of what the literature has said, and then what it hasn't said, which is why you're actually going to do this project, and then your aims, and then your methods as well. And so that way in your methods, you're actually going through and you're specifically stating what you're going to look at. So if that's a technique or patients, who are they, what age are they, what type of disease do they have, who are you going to include and exclude. It might be a comparison of technology, it might be a comparison of different people in the workplace. We've done a lot of studies comparing different people's ability to plan studies, like interplanner studies. So we might have a small group of patient data sets, but a broader range of radiation therapists, of junior, middle, very experienced, and they're the group. That's what the study is about. It's not actually the patient. So we've got one way of stabilising patients, but we'd like to consider implementing a new way of stabilising them. So we're comparing both of those, in which case all of the other variables need to be consistent, like the page, the patient, and so on. And all of the work that you're doing at this stage can then be reviewed by your colleagues, and it can be reviewed by the process in your department, which will depend on the type of project and the hospital that you're working in. But hopefully what will come out of it is that you can, at the end of the project, once you have results and you can analyse them, is that you can write them up either as a guideline or a recommendation based on the evidence that you've created in your department from your project. And then hopefully you can also share that with your other colleagues in other hospitals at conferences and ultimately in a paper. And all the work that you've done in those initial stages, you're halfway there to writing a paper, because you still need your introduction and your methods. You're just adding your results and a discussion at the end. So I think it's such an important stage to invest the time before you actually start to get the best, because we know that everyone's busy clinically. It's really hard to get time. And so you want to use your time and resources in the best possible way.
Yeah, it's very, very important that these considerations, they need to be part of the planning. And having someone there to review it is great, but not everyone does. You're very lucky at Peter Mac. You have a fantastic environment to do the research in, but I'm thinking of some small private center out in the outer suburbs where there's nobody. And so these people, I think, are best set to get a mentor or someone to collaborate with, even if it's an academic, to help them with those things. And in those lines, we have a great question. Who wants to read out the question? We've received a great question.
Yeah, I can read out the question for you, Michal. This is a question from Megan, and it says, it's a question about sample size, and it's that tough question, which is, how do you know how many you need? Is there a perfect number? Do you want to have a go at that, Michal?
May I tell you, Megan, that no one is a statistician, so we are all grappling with that problem on a daily basis, and there is no magic number of what's right or wrong. Does anyone want to answer it in more detail?
There are tests that you can do. People often do pilot studies with a set number. It may be 30. It really depends on what you're interested in looking at. And from that pilot study, you can do calculations that will, depending on your early results, that will give you an indication of how many you'll require, how many participants you'll require in your study to end up with a result that is likely to be significant enough to give you an answer to your question. So I think that's a method that people often use, but it's always good to have a statistician in your team or that you can contact that can give you some advice along the way. Fortunately, at the university, we have people that we can contact, and I'm sure within the departments as well, there'd be people who know someone with statistics background that could give some advice. Oh, could I also say, just before we move on, just to remind you that we've just got under 5 minutes left, and so just be mindful that we will be finishing about 4 minutes if there's other things that we need to discuss.
Yeah, just a quick comment with regards to Megan's question again. A lot of the times we don't have a number in mind. We have to start with something. If you're dealing with something very rare, then 10 cases may be enough. If you're dealing with something that's very common, you may need more. But a lot of clinicians have a sample size of 30, 50, 100, and they pluck that number out of the nowhere. And there's no real reason for that number. So read what other people have published in that field. And that may give you a guideline, but it is not easy, especially if there's no preliminary data, to do a proper power analysis on it. So don't be scared, but you can always approach someone, a statistician, whether at another hospital or in a university, and ask. And most people are really happy to give you some advice.
I think it's worth considering too. The simple, like the more complex you make it, and the more questions you're asking, the more patients or samples or numbers that you'll need. So yeah, just simplify. But
that's right. Yeah. In the end, it has to make clinical sense, and you need to be able to convince other clinicians that your results stand up for criticism. So if you have a sample size of 10 on one question, no one may believe it. But if it's a very rare cancer type, for example, it may be robust enough. So ask another clinician too, and get some advice from other people. Unfortunately, there's no formula on how to do this, unless you're doing a power analysis, but that requires a little bit of preliminary data.
Caroline made a point as well on the chat. She said in qualitative research, sample size is not as important. You may get rich data from 1 or 2 in-depth patient interviews.
That's a great point. Kez, are you around? Is she there? No, she's just...
I am there, yes, for
Would you like to
second.
Comment qualitative data samples?
Yeah, and look, I think a lot of the time when you're doing qualitative research, you will actually sample until what we call saturation. So you might not really know how many people you're going to have in that research, but you will wait for themes to emerge in the research, and then once a theme continues to recur, sorry about the background noise, once a theme continues to recur, you've reached saturation, and that's an indicator that confirms that this is, it might be quite a valid kind of theme that you're coming up with.
That's right. Yes. So qualitative research is usually, at the moment, it's not, people don't think about it immediately, but if you're running a survey, for example, you don't know how many you will have. But obviously you're going to target a particular group of participants, and then you will have to try and target as many as you can and get participation rates that are reasonable. But that's also often difficult to achieve. Peter, did you want to comment on anything else? Because we'll have to wrap it up soon. Or just unmute yourself.
Thank you. It says less than a minute now, so we're going to get cut off at any moment. But I'd like to thank you, Michal, for hosting, and Sarah for participating tonight. This is being recorded, so we will make it available. And just to let you know that we'll meet again probably in about 2 months' time. Yes,
thank you everyone who was participating in our previous webinar. Was looked at after the event quite often, so we may have more participants once it's been uploaded onto our website. So thank you everybody for listening in tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michal.
And keep sending us questions if you have. We'll try and address them.
Fantastic.
Bye everyone.
Goodbye.